water. Back then, there was no watering. They didn't, it just didn't happen that way. God had to send rain. All right. Um, so basically, but it's really God that decides how big of a crop you have. If it's a bumper crop, we thank God for that. We don't make the seed grow. Okay, that's a miracle of God. Arnold argues that assets primarily come from God's work, and income is primarily man's work. He argues that the Old Testament tithe was based on God's work or assets and not ours. And he breaks all of that down. I'm giving you the thumbnail here. Again, his treatise is in depth in defending this position. Number 4, the book makes a distinction by word study between giving and payment. This was also very good. All right. In the Old Testament and New Testament, giving is free will. Payment is compulsory. All right. As in Exodus, I looked at this when I did that study over at Church of the Messiah, how that when the Israelites were in the wilderness and they were building the tabernacle, there were certain things that were compulsory, and I think 10%, okay, and there were other things that were free will, okay. In essence, you could fairly say that some of it was a required tax and other was free will given. And in fact, as far as materials to build the tabernacle, at one point Moses tells the people to stop. We've got more than we need. All right. How these words are used in conjunction with Old Testament and New Testament giving is very interesting. Now, okay. He uses this distinction, and when he talks about the well-used argument of Abraham tithe, okay? Well, he says Abraham didn't tithe. Abraham gave. The word that's used there, the Hebrew word, doesn't have to do with a payment. It has with giving. Therefore, what Abraham gave was free will. Then he goes in other places in the New Testament and Old Testament, the Greek and the Hebrew, and shows where the tithe is spoken of in respect of a payment, okay, in Old Testament law. All right, so there's a difference there. He also points out, as far as Joseph, I believe it was it Jacob or Joseph? They use that argument all the time in regard to, I believe it was Jacob, okay, and that, Jacob tithed. But again, he points out that Jacob's vow was a deal where he said, God, if you do this, I'll give you 10% of that. It was contingent on God doing something. All right? So those are ridiculous arguments for the tithes, obviously. But he breaks all that down. 5, the book makes the case that the Levites were supported by tithes. The tithe never went to God. It went to the Levites. The often used Malachi verse to warn parishioners about robbing God by not tithing was actually addressed to the priest of that day, not God's people in general. So let's read here what his argument for that. First, you have Nehemiah 13:10, King James Version. It says, "And I perceived that the portions of the Levites had not been given them, for the Levites and the singers that did the work were fled every one to his field." All right, what is that all about? He says here, I believe this verse is telling us that the priests stole the Levites' portion of the tithe. Therefore, they had no food to eat at the temple, and they went back to their own fields accordingly. All right? We must interpret this verse in this way, because nowhere does it say that the priest had also left the temple. The priest had the food. Read chapter 13 of Nehemiah to get the complete picture. So Malachi 1:14 shows the priest robbed God of the offerings, and Nehemiah 13:10 shows the priest robbed God of the tithes. Next, in Malachi 3:10, God says to bring all the tithes to the storehouse. The people took the tithes to the Levites who lived in the Levitical cities, not to the temple. You got that? The tithe supported the Levites. Now this goes back to what I'm saying. It was a tax. It was compulsory. All right? The Levites took the required tithe, all right, tithe of the tithe to the temple. See Jeremiah 10:37 through 38. Only those tithes ever made it to the temple. The priests then took those tithes to the storehouse. Okay? It only makes sense if God is speaking to the priests in this verse. Therefore, I believe that the evidence shows that Malachi 3:8 through 10 is being addressed to the priests, not the people. All right? Now, I've got a manuscript of a sermon, okay, from a local New Calvinist church, where it was taught from the pulpit that if based on this Malachi chapter 3, that if you didn't tithe 10% to God from your income, that God would curse you, okay, or curse you with a curse. You see, in the case that Pastor Arnold is making here, that's completely upside down, okay? That's not what was going on at all right? All in all, the book completely dismantles the popular arguments for tithing. I want to conclude this message by drawing from another idea found in this book. Another distinction made by this author was between definitions and interpretations. Okay? I want to add a closing thought to that distinction. When we approach the Bible, are we looking for definitions or some sort of interpretation? The Ethiopian eunuch didn't ask Philip for an interpretation, he asked for an explanation. Okay? When we approach life questions concerning how we please God, we need definitive answers. Institutions encourage the following of interpretations. We call that orthodoxy. Okay? If you don't believe we live in an interpretation church culture, go to the Christian bookstore. Okay? People are reading that stuff instead of finding definitions in the Bible. And the Bible is mostly by definition. This is, my favorite verse of Scripture. This is God's will for you. Oh, wow. Okay? Definition. Your sanctification. You want to know God's will? There it is, right there. It's your sanctification. Well, what's sanctification, Paul? Give me a definition. That. The next word is that. Okay? You may know how to control your body. That's the definition of sanctification. Okay? Definitions. How powerful is that? Whether it be giving or some other life issue, we don't need interpretations. We need definitions. Okay? We need to start being definition focused and not interpretation focused. New Testament giving is defined by need, not the payment of a tax. Okay? Any questions or comments? None. Shut off the video.